Hello, all of you risk takers and truth takers to the podcast Life the Battlefield. Today we're going to talk about Cambridge 5. That's a 4 people plus 1. However, I'd like to talk to you about Cambridge 5, which you mostly heard about them and how successful were they are working for the Russians. They spied on NATO, on England, on the US, and how they have the uninterrupted relationship between the Russians and themselves. Now, before we continue, I'd like to share something with you. Those who don't know, I used to be work for the military and then diplomacy. And as a part of my curriculum, I was working in security intelligence services, particularly in diplomatic environment. And Julius Caesar has the expression, I love betrayal, but I hate traitors. And he never kept the traitors for himself, even they betrayed their own people, because it doesn't matter who you're fighting for the good or bad or this and that. Once when you become the traitor, you're a traitor forever. You're not a good enough, nothing better for those who you're working for, or you're nothing good for the people you betray. Everybody who betrayed their own people, the government, the military, the list goes on, is a worst of the worst, because they are people who acting on mice methods, money, ideology, coercion, and ego. Those are 4 elements why somebody becomes a traitor. When you become the traitor, doesn't matter you're doing this for patriotism or treason, it's wrong. Sometimes you can be love at what you're doing, but every your action is gonna result in a losses of the life, on the losses of the economy, the losses of the money. The most importantly, once when you start betraying, you're always going to be traitor. You and every generation, your family comes after you. Today I want to talk to you about the Cambridge 5, which is a 4 people plus 1. And interesting story about them it is that they did all of these things because of the patriotism. Allegedly they love the Russians. But is it good or bad? Let's go find out together. The British aristocracy that spy for the Soviets, it's called the Cambridge 5. Arguably the best Cold War espionage outfit, compromised top officials and vested agencies to collect the most sensitive data from them, which they can send directly to KGB. Deny everything, never acknowledge anything, not even when they were proof in your face. This is the first and most important lesson that any top spy must learn in order to survive the service. In this way, Kim Philby, the Cold War greatest double agent, taught Stasi intelligence in East Berlin. Kim Philby, that's correct. There are stories of Cold War espionage networks that occasionally sound fabricated. However, few of those stories have the creativity and frightening potential that this one does. And I do remember when I was working in intelligence, I was being told, old quote, to be the spy, you must be the man of integrity, yet you must be prepared to be the criminal. But today we're going to talk about Cambridge 5. They were not faceless bureaucrats buried deep within the federal government. No. This man belonged to the British aristocracy, and had attended the University of Cambridge, one of the world's most prestigious educational institutions. As students in the 1930s, they formed a friendship and ideas that would eventually take them down a path of deception between the allure of communism and the frightening shadow of fascism. Cold War didn't start yesterday, it started in 1945. Tensions in World War era. During the interwar years, there was a lot of upheaval and change. Following the World War I, Europe was traumatized by the conflict because of the tremendous losses in human lives, dealing with the rise of new political ideas and the breakup of empires. Despite its victory, yes, United Kingdom was not immune to the continent's social-economic turmoil. As unemployment rose and financial hardships exacerbated following the Great Depression, many people began to question the viability of capitalist democracies. People will start questioning this. Intellectual circles provided fertile ground for these waves of discontent, and universities evolved into centers of political discourse and debate. Universities, that is correct. The nation intellectual elite congregated at Cambridge University. That's where the elite was, where an exceptionally heated ideological battle raged. The institution had long been a bastion of traditional and conventional wisdom, but in the 1930s saw the rise of left-wing student organizations, particularly, yes, communist sympathizers. Despite the grim undertones of Stalin purges, others saw the Soviet Union as a light of hope against the rise of fascism in Europe, as personified by Mussolini, Italy, and Hitler's Germany. Now you ask yourself, but how these people from elite Cambridge University been hired? Well, even as the political situation outside its gates become more volatile, young minds were being shaped and influenced by the venerable halls of Cambridge University. Certain groups found communism especially alluring because it evoked ideals of a perfect society based on equality and the common good. For those who don't know, I grew up in communism in 70s and 80s. And communism was that type of society on a paper. Many people, particularly the Cambridge Five, saw this worldwide as a protective shield against the impending authoritarian storm. However, this radicalization was more than just a mental endeavor. It was deeply personal, driven by camaraderie in covert meetings and discussion groups, friendship, mentorship, and a sense of shared purpose. Needless to say to you, once when you're in universities, once when you start doing all these little secret meetings where you believe that your idea is going to shape the world, that's where the groups start forming. That's where the people who stay, people who drop, new people come. That's how everything starts, and all these little meetings behind closed doors. In this situation, the Soviet intelligence agency saw an opportunity. The NKVD, which preceded the KGB, saw potential in this disillusioned young men, not just based on their opinions, but also on the future leadership roles that they were anticipated to hold. The hiring process was careful and private. The Soviet officials, who were experts at the psychological manipulation, used the young man combination of idealism and ambition. They were given the opportunity to actively combat the rise of fascism and develop communism. Of course, joining forces with something bigger than themselves. For example, Kim Philby, about who I previously created a video, you can check it here, was introduced to the field of espionage by fellow communist sympathizers, and everything fell into place from there. So he's been introduced to espionage by somebody else. Through introductions and recommendations, a group was formed one by one. May I just say something to you? Once when you have this guy who is like Kim Philby, already it's been vetted and checked, and he started having the group of the people who were around him, do you really believe that he just introduced everybody to communism? No. He's been told by the person in shadow, I think that this person should be good for the group. Bring it. Иди сюда, друзья. Every member is progressively, meticulously assimilated into the group. That's correct. Believing that their concealed actions are not simply acts of disobedience, but rather important contribution to a good cause. That's what they believe, that they're doing good cause. What exactly were the Cambridge Five? Kim Philby, he was the number one, was the most important of them all. Sharp-witted and charismatic Philby quickly rose to the ranks of the British intelligence agency, eventually gaining a senior position in MI6. However, Philby was one of the KGB most valuable assets because of his position, which allowed him to offer the Soviet a wealth of essential information. Beyond his espionage, Philby has a secret life, and in his secret life he demonstrated his considerable aptitude for deception, as he's maintained close contact with many in intelligence establishment, including those entrusted to find who? Well, Soviet spies. Number 2 of the Cambridge Five is Mr. Donald MacLean. There was Donald MacLean, a man as committed to communist cause as Kim Philby. MacLean acquired access to nuclear and diplomatic secrets while he was working in the British Foreign Office. Where else? During his tenure, he gently conveyed this intelligence to the Soviet Union, which had direct impact on the geopolitical landscape of the early Cold War. Before I continue, I'd like to ask you if you know anything about this. Gentlemen, feel free to leave in comment section below. Number 3 in the Cambridge Five group is Guy Burgess. MacLean's friendship with Guy Burgess, another prominent ring member, complicated their espionage efforts. Complicated. Burgess appeared to be an unusual option for a spy due to his colorful personality and casual attitude. We're talking about 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s. where the things are a little bit different than today. Nonetheless, his work at the Foreign Office and then the British Embassy in Washington allowed him to provide critical intelligence to the Soviets on a regular basis, demonstrating the Cambridge network effectiveness. Number 4 in Cambridge 5 is Mr. Anthony Blunt. Anthony Blunt was an equal essential member of the group. Even his contributions were sometimes overshadowed by those of his contemporaries. Blunt was a well-known art historian whose covert operations contradicted his academic pursuit. He was a liaison between the MI5 and MI6 in the United Kingdom, giving him access to many intelligence secrets. Blunt definitely succeeded for many years advancing Soviet objectives until confessing decades later in exchange for security. Well, why did I begin my story with 4 + 1 and I say Cambridge 5? Because the story about these spies was so widely spread in the early 1990s. The discovery of the fifth man of the group did not fit in anyone's script. In the early 1990s, Berlin Wall fell down, Stasi files. Anthony Blunt in particular had a talent for spying and was drawn to John Cairncross. That's correct. His name is John Cairncross. The Cambridge 5 story is completed by the John Cairncross. Despite being marginalized in popular narratives on occasions, Cairncross made an important contribution. And I want you to know something. When we talk about spying, sometimes some names are deliberately, purposely omitted because they've done the most of damage. During World War II, he worked at the code-breaking laboratory Bletchley Park. You know, where the English had access to Enigma machine? That's correct. That's where the secrets was happening in the Second World War. And later in many government ministries, providing the Soviets with diverse range of intelligence. What details and secrets did they discover? So this Cambridge 5, I can see they were sitting and working in government departments. They revealed intelligence which encompassed everything from nuclear research to war preparations, transformed the geopolitical landscape and immensely assisted the Soviet Union in its ambition for global dominance. Kim Philby maintained an unrivaled position within MI6. He was based in Washington at the onset of the Cold War and he had access to the inner workings of the Western intelligence system, that's including the United States. In this capacity, he was able to continue a steady supply intelligence to Moscow while alluding to suspicions from other spies. Philby specifically briefed the Russians about an operation called Viable, a plan to incite anti-communist revolt in Albania. Albania was once upon a time under Enver Hoxha, was a very tough communist country with 800,000 bunkers on their borders. His timely intelligence enabled the Soviets and their allies to neutralize the project, ensuring its devastating collapse. Donald McLean made significant contribution in different fields. McLean's position in the Foreign Office provided him access to the most highly classified nuclear weapons information in the Western world. Subtly, he informed the Soviets about atomic bomb and later US nuclear policy. By revising its overhead nuclear plans, the USSR, or Soviet Union, was able to level the playing field in the extremely competitive nuclear arm race. Despite his troubled personal life, Guy Burgess was a very valuable source of diplomatic intelligence for the Soviets. While working in the British Embassy in Washington, D.C., he supplied the Soviets leadership with a very intimate perspective on Western diplomatic attitudes and methods by passing along critical documents pertaining to Anglo-American negotiations. Meanwhile, Anthony Blunt acts were less visible but no less powerful. Because of his position as a liaison between the British intelligence services, he was able to obtain wide range of secrets, MI5, MI6. So he sits between. Up the years, he had passed up hundreds of documents ranging from MI5 operations to British agent identities. That is correct. So you must understand, when you're working between two agencies, you're getting double informations. John Cairncross, stationed at Bletchley Park, had access to ultra secret, which included deciphering these German Enigma codes as one of the most valuable resources available to the Allies. During the pivotal Battle of Kursk in 1943, he assisted the Soviets by giving them with critical piece of decrypted intelligence. So obviously that's how their cooperation extended. So now, what prompted their discovery? Regardless of how diligent the Cambridge Five were, the nature of espionage meant that the potential of detection was always present. And that's how you're discovering your spies. Spies, the traitors, not spies, traitors, apologies. When somebody go and detect the run to the Russians or from Russian to the Americans, they bring with them some valuable assets, something like a names, which in those days and even today, it's one of the most valuable assets involved of espionage, to pinpoint who is spying for who. By the early 1950s, cracks in the protective shroud of secrecy began to emerge. Thanks in the part of Western counterintelligence efforts and the testimony of Eastern Bloc defectors, the intelligence community began to piece together a picture of severe betrayal within their ranks. It's very severe. Those betrayals are very severe. You can see clearly where they were working, what accesses they had. The defection of Igor Guzenko, a Soviet codebreaker in Canada, the guy who initiated the Cold War, about whom I previously wrote, saw the first seeds of suspicion. Despite the fact that Guzenko did not provide direct evidence in regard to the Cambridge Five, his revelations about broad Soviet espionage operations in the West prompted intelligence organizations to reassess and scrutinize their operations. As the investigations advanced, the web that surrounded the Cambridge Five network became tighter. And that's how things is being done. Donald McLean was amongst the first to be probed. His profession allowed him to have access to nuclear secrets. By 1951, MI5 was on the verge of demonstrating his treason. As the news tightened, the Soviets arranged McLean's escape with Philby's help. In very unexpected change of events, Guy Burgess, who was neither under suspicion nor planning to defect at the time, joined McLean to aid him. Burgess' abrupt departure paired with McLean added to the mystery and raised further concerns. So other guy says like, look, if you are going to murder Russia, I come with you. And then suddenly, intelligence community in UK and US says like, well, two major people missing. Because of his strong relationship with Burgess and his respected position in MI6, Philby was definitely suspect. Despite being cleared in a cursory investigation, his reputation in the intelligence community has suffered. Philby opted to desert to the Soviet Union, where he would spend the rest of his natural life, as new evidence emerged on another session of severe interrogation. Another Blunt presentation was longer and more detailed. Blunt was exposed as a spy in 1964 after American defector Michael Strite provided evidence. Blunt confessed in exchange for immunity from prosecution in a secret bargain to avoid public humiliation. He didn't come out publicly until 1979, which startled many British establishment figures. Despite being probed several times through the 1960s, John Cairncross only admitted to his espionage activities in 1964. His public exposure was delayed, as was Blunt's, and his participation became well recognized in 1990s, because West suddenly has the access to the tons of documents from the Eastern Bloc. Their influence of Cambridge Five on the remainder of the Cold War was tremendous. The idea that members of the nation elite educated at its most prestigious institutions might turn against their own country startled the establishment. Western intelligence organizations, particularly Brittany MI5, MI6, were badly shocked by the Cambridge Five treachery. Needless to say, the impact has been felt in political corridors, intelligence services, and broader social fabrics, altering people, notions of loyalty, trust, and the weaknesses of democratic system. That's correct. It was emphasized how critical it was to examine internal security measures, screening methods, and recruitment practice as soon as possible. Surprise, surprise, there was the guy, a few years later, emerging called Robert Hanson. Politically, the UK public relations suffered significantly as a result of defection and the subsequent revelations. Russians used this very well. Now, they presented an establishment riddled with the flaws that allow ideological infiltration, as well as showing clear flaws in the national intelligence systems. After Kim Philby, Guy Burgess, Donald McLean, Anthony Blunt, and John Cancross, all screening agent procedure failed. There is still no open discussion on the damage they caused to their country, and they caused big damage, no question asked. British MI5 and MI6 kept the 400-page record about them hidden for 50 years. Maybe out of embarrassment or fear of the repercussions. They work extremely hard to keep their operations covered, particularly from America, which they also dealt heavy blows to. The lessons learned from their story are still pertinent to discussion about intelligence, national security, and complexities of the international combat today, even today. If any intelligence agency wants to have the perfect spy or agent working for them, it must be based on ideology. Ideologically supported agent will do everything for free, on time, and with a pleasure. Cambridge 5 is no difference. Highly educated elite of the Britain, they've been ideologically poisoned to do what most of people would consider it's impossible. Thank you for watching Live the Battlefield. Feel free to subscribe, share, like, and comment. And let me know, what do you know about Cambridge 5? What do you think what Russians know today about Western society? Thank you for watching. Feel free to subscribe, share, like, and comment.